We are really honored to be hosting this evening a really special guest, and it's kind of synchronistic for Lauren and I. We were invited about a month and a half ago to come down to a gathering that's going to be taking place in Mexico, January 18th through 23rd, called the Greater Reset. And it's basically a 5-day conference on freedom and sovereignty and different...
And coming together to create a new future, right? Like, this is our alternative to the Great Reset, right? The Greater Reset. So we're planning with all of these people down there and taking part in something really special. You can see it online, or you can come in person, and it's really affordable.
Yeah, we're excited. So it's January 18th through 23rd, and we were asked to come and speak on vegan homesteading. And so basically homesteading without exploiting
organic vegan
animals. And so we were excited. We accepted the invitation and started kind of working on our presentation. And pretty much right after that, I think we were contacted by our guest this evening that they wanted to see if he could come to our property and speak. And so it's really synchronistic for us because this is somebody who has been at the forefront of the vegan movement for probably as long as it's been a vegan movement. He's been a vegan since I was born. I think, did you say 1975? Is that when it was 1980? 1975. So it's 1975, which was when I was born. I believe, I didn't study this, but I believe our guest, Dr. Will Tuttle, and his lovely wife, Madeline, whose art is on display behind us. She's a visionary artist, and I was looking at her art online, and I was just commenting to Dr. Tuttle that I could see what attention she pays to the eyes in her animals, and so that you can see into the souls of them and really feel that these animals are sentient, special beings. And so thank you for sharing your art. Dr. Tuttle has been vegan along with his partner for 40 some odd years, right? He was a Buddhist monk. Is that correct?
Yes.
Buddhist monk. And he's written this amazing book, amongst others, called The World Peace Diet. And this is a bestseller. And he's here to talk to us tonight about his book, about health, freedom, about things that are going on in the world. And we're really excited to see what he has to share with us. So if you guys could give your attention and give it up for our guest tonight, Dr. Tuttle.
So thank you. Let's have a big hand for Paul and Lauren. This has been a wonderful gathering. The food was spectacular, and thanks really for preparing that amazing vegan organic meal. We're always emphasizing the importance of organic as well as vegan, because as soon as we start using pesticides and herbicides and fungicides, we're killing birds and fish and other living beings. So it goes along with the whole thing, basically. How many of you, have any of you read The World Peace Diet, the book? Some of you? A few, yeah, okay, reading it right now. I know some of you have. I'd like to basically talk about a few of the main ideas in The World Peace Diet, and then open it up, and maybe some of the ideas in the health freedom also, and then open it up for your questions. So is everybody comfortable? Can you hear and see and everything just good? Yeah? Great. I know. You're comfortable because we were going to do this out there. So this is definitely comfortable.
You're in magical.
Right. So, as these paintings by Madeline demonstrate, the animals that share this earth with us are not just props in a drama that we can imprison or kill or whatever. They are beings who have interests that are as important to them as our interests are to us. And so I think the big failure, really, of humanity up to this point has been our massive oppression and domination and exploitation and abuse of billions of animals every year, routinely and relentlessly, as if it doesn't matter, as if it's no big deal. They're just things, they're just objects. We buy and sell them by the pound. I mean, that's inconceivable to me, really, now that I've been a vegan since 1980, but to look at them like they're just sacks of cement that we just sell by the pound. And so, in a certain sense, it's almost hard to tolerate living in a society where billions of animals are sold by the pound every single day. But that's the reality. When we include marine animals, fishes, it really is literally billions of animals every day. So this is the biggest thing we're doing as human beings. There's no bigger activity on planet Earth than animal agriculture in terms of the amount of land we're using, the amount of pollution that's created, And not only in the outer world, but in the inner world. Because when we're eating food, we're not just eating food, we're eating the actual underlying mentality of our society. We're eating all the attitudes and norms and values of our society, and they're invisible. No one actually looks into this because we're afraid to look into it. Most people don't want to know. We've learned early on, I think, really to block out and disconnect from the reality of our food. So the good news, basically, which is the main thing I want to emphasize, is the good news. The good news is all of us have been given the gift of a physical body. You know, here we are. We wouldn't be here without this. So we have this physical body, and the good news is that it has been provided to us free of charge. Maybe we had to pay something to get it. I'm not sure exactly, but we paid the price, and here we are. And it doesn't require any animals to suffer to get all the nutrients that we need to celebrate our lives on this beautiful earth. That's the great good news. The problem is that we've all been born into a society where from the time we're little infants, we've been compelled by very loving and caring people to eat the flesh and secretions of horribly abused animals and pretend that it's normal and natural to do that. And they did it because they loved us and they wanted us to get plenty of protein and plenty of calcium and so forth. But along with it, we got a lot of physical suffering, as well as much worse. The inner landscape of our consciousness was harmed, wounded by that tremendously. This is what I've realized over the years. John McDougall says, he's a vegan MD, he says that the amount of suffering that is inflicted on children by their well-meaning parents in feeding them meat, dairy, products, and eggs, in terms of the suffering of sore throats and runny noses and earaches and tonsillitis and appendicitis and acne and all these things that come from eating animal foods, especially dairy products. I said if parents inflicted that much suffering on their kids by hitting them with a stick, they'd be locked up and thrown in jail probably. But since they're doing it through the food, then nobody ever cares. And I went through this, and I think a lot of us probably went through this. I remember when I was a kid, at one point, I had an appendicitis, which is a direct result of dairy and the inflammation that dairy products are always causing. And my little brother was always having earaches and runny noses and sore throats and all these things. Type 1 diabetes pretty much is driven directly by these things, and so many things that are really filling up our hospitals and the medical centers and making the pharmaceutical industry get so wealthy that it has so much money that it can basically buy our government. It's from animal agriculture. And so this is the fixture in our society. It's the defining core of our society is animal agriculture. And this is something that we're not taught. It took me about 30 years to actually figure this out. That basically we live in a herding society. We live in a society that's organized around imprisoning animals and eating them. And so that, I think, is the big wound. So in the World Peace Diet, which I just want to mention briefly, that I think because to understand our situation right now, I think we have to understand that the reason we're facing such terrible problems with having our freedoms taken away is because we are stealing the freedoms of other living beings on a massive scale, and yet we pretend not to see it. And so for me, when I saw like what started happening in January, February, March of 2020, when they started rolling out this idea that we have a pandemic and everybody be very afraid and we have to start social distancing and locking down and wearing masks and we're all going to be contagious for this deadly viral horrible thing. I mean, we knew from the get-go that it was a total hoax. It was so obvious. I mean, you have to be really stupid, I think, not to see it. I mean, it's so totally obvious. But the problem, I think, is that most people have imbibed the narrative of our society on such a deep level that it all made sense that we should do all those things somehow. But I think as vegans, which I figured this out, back when I was in my early mid-20s, I guess it was, to just not question, to question the official narratives, to not comply with the official stories that our society is pushing on us. And so I guess it was about 50 years ago, I actually stopped having a television. I haven't watched TV in 50 years. Haven't really been to a doctor or to the drugstore in about 50 years. So I didn't realize, I guess Madeline's been very similar. She's kind of done the same thing. I met her in Switzerland about 30 years ago. And so we've kind of stayed out of the worldly view of things. So I understand that if people are watching television, they're going to doctors, they're going to the drugstores, then they would believe all these lies that we're being attacked by viruses and that we're contagious and we're going to make each other sick and so forth. But I had never believed any of that. So I thought that the vegans would be similar to us and would be right there as champions of liberty and freedom and making sure that we don't allow our basic rights, our constitutional rights of freedom of assembly and freedom of speech and freedom of the press and freedom of bodily autonomy to be taken away, because the whole core of vegan living really is to respect the sovereignty of individual beings. And that's what it's about. It's about respecting the sovereignty of individual cows, pigs, chickens, turkeys, ducks, geese, fishes. You respect their sovereignty, you let them live their lives. And so how could we justify taking away the sovereignty of individual human beings, which should be also respected? But most people, even vegans and even people on the left, which I thought I was on the left, they were like, take away our sovereignty and imprison us in these laws that were based on a grotesque anti-scientific foundation of fear about a virus that you couldn't even say it exists necessarily. I mean, there's a lot of evidence that there isn't even this virus doesn't even exist, or viruses in general aren't even anything to be worried about. So since I've written the World Peace Diet, which came out about 15 years ago, it became a #1 Amazon bestseller about 10 years ago. And Madeline and I traveled giving lectures and talking about these ideas that whatever we do to animals, sooner or later, it happens to us. So if we're going to sow the seeds of imprisoning animals and force medicating animals by the millions and microchipping animals by the millions and tracking them and impregnating them on rape racks and stealing their babies, all these things, we do this by the millions, by the billions. How do we expect that that's not going to happen to us? As you sow, so shall you reap. I used to teach college courses in comparative religion. And every religion teaches that teaching. Every religion teaches the golden rule, basically. They have their own version of that. Don't do to others what you wouldn't want to have done to you. And do to others what you would like to have done to you, right? If you want to be free, then let others be free. If you want to be loved, be loving. If you want to have an abundant life, then just give, be generous. Whatever we put out comes back, and that's also called the law of karma, or sowing and reaping. And yet we somehow think that we're above that law, I think, in our society, that we can abuse these animals. We see around us these beautiful canine animals and other animals, and we know when we look into their eyes that there's a being in there that has interest and doesn't want to be imprisoned. And if anyone came up to us and said, well, your dog looks pretty good, maybe, what do you say, $7.50 a pound, maybe? we'd be completely outraged because we know them as a being. So there's a tremendous psychological and spiritual wound that has been inflicted on all of us by virtue of just being born into this society where this is done like normal and natural. And we don't realize the degree to which we've been wounded by this. And it makes us very easily become livestock. It's been so weird to me to see how willingly and almost enthusiastically people have given up their freedom, given up their rights, trusted authorities, do whatever they say, attack anyone who questions this whole thing, right? That's been the weird thing, like, to me, that vegans would do that. Like, we were, right up until March of 2020, we were giving lectures promoting veganism, and as soon as the lockdowns came, suddenly the vegan groups said no more lectures. You can't come and talk anymore. And we were like, why not? I mean, the animals are still getting killed. We should still, gather and give the talks. Oh no, we don't want to get sick. It was really frustrating to us. And I remember I did a lot of research on this and a lot of soul searching and analysis of this, and I have a lot to say about it, actually. In fact, I'm writing another book. It's called The Benevolent Revolution. It should be out in a few months, about some of the stuff that went on and why it went on. But the basic thing we found, for example, like every year, I would always give a lecture for the Veg Fest of San Francisco, the Veg Fest in Sacramento, the Veg Fest in Santa Rosa, up in Northern California, and other Veg Fests. And they started having their Veg Fests again this last year, and they wouldn't let me speak. They said, no, you can't speak anymore at our Veg Fest. And I said, why not? And they said, because you spread misinformation. You tell people that vaccines are dangerous and they're not effective. And I said, but I'm speaking about veganism, I'm not speaking about vaccines. Well, anyway, we think it's dangerous misinformation. And then, so I sent an email and I said, do you really going to stick with that? Don't you think we should be allowed to speak about veganism even if we have a disagreement about medications? And the person in charge of the San Francisco Vegan Society said, well, the thing is that vaccines are important because they help keep us healthy, and if we're healthy, we can save more animals. And so I thought, oh wait a minute here. So this is the rationale, and this is the actual rationale. It's coming right from the Vegan Society in London. That because Donald Watson, when he coined the word vegan, he said that veganism is a philosophy and way of life which seeks to exclude as far as possible and practical all forms of exploitation of and cruelty to animals for food, clothing, or any other purpose. So it includes all foods, including dairy and eggs and leather and silk and wool and rodeos and circuses. Just try to leave the animals alone, let them live as far as possible and practical. But now they've interpreted COVID, for example, or other these diseases that, well, that's just beyond our control. So it's okay to have a vaccine with animal ingredients that are tested on animals. There are a lot of animal suffering. There's squalene in these vaccines, even the mRNA vaccines, which comes from horseshoe crabs. All kinds of animals are killed. Monkeys are being killed by the thousands for these vaccines, the COVID vaccines. And so to me, this is really a sign that the vegan movement has been compromised. It's been infiltrated by people who don't either knowingly or unknowingly are destroying it from within. Because I think the vegan movement is really the most threatening movement to the tyrannical violence that is trying to be rolled out here. Because if we go vegan as a society, we are creating a foundation for freedom for ourselves that is powerful. But if we're eating animal foods, on some level, we know we're not worthy of freedom because we're enslaving. I'm taking out my wallet and I'm paying for someone to imprison an animal, to impregnate her in a rape or act, to steal her baby, to kill her baby, to steal her milk, steal her eggs, steal her life, steal her purpose, steal everything. And it's not necessary because all the nutrients that we need to live we can get from plants. So that's the big problem, I think. And so what I realized, though, what this woman, this person said when she wrote back to me from the San Francisco Vegetarian Society and said that, it would be the same thing. You could say the same thing basically. Well, we really wanted to stay healthy so that we can save animals. So now we realize that we need to eat a little bit of fish and chicken so we can be healthy, so we can save animals. That's basically what they're saying, right? If we need to be vaccinated. I mean, it's the same thing. We're using animal foods, animal products, animal medications in order to be healthy so we can save animals. And I think there's something very powerful in making a commitment to not comply with tyranny and to just live our lives in an absolute sense as an expression of compassion and kindness and respect for other living beings, and to live that. And the more each one of us as individuals can do that, the more we create a field around us that helps other people to do the same thing. And when we do that, I think we're giving a great gift to the rest of the world, just by our life, our individual life. And that creates a field that encourages other people and gives an example for that. Because I really, I've been a vegan activist for over 40 years, since 1980. And I've learned that it's very hard to change other people. When we want them to go vegan and we try to, come on, and we argue with them and we tell them all the reasons and so forth, the harder we try to change them, usually the harder they resist because they feel like we're trying to change them. And ultimately, we can only change ourselves. So I think really what the whole movement needs at this point, the movement for the liberation of animals and humans, is for us humans to develop a spiritual connection with our true nature that goes beyond just the materialism of our society, to see all life as eternal consciousness and to respect that, and including ourselves, and to every morning, I would say, and throughout the day, to reconnect with that understanding, so that when whatever we're saying, whatever we're doing, whatever activism we're engaging in, we're not doing it as a separate self trying to change other separate selves, that we're doing it out of an awareness that there's one life living through all of us. And we're sharing our own experience just to bring love and healing to the situation, not to blame and criticize or shame or change another person, but to share our own experience. And when we do that, I think we can forget about whether or not we're successful in making positive changes in other people. It doesn't really matter, ultimately. What matters is we come to this earth, and the earth is already, for 10,000 years, there's been animal agriculture. There's been 10,000 years of war and the domination of women and the domination of animals, and this whole thing has been going. I have a chapter in the World Peace Diet that goes into the history of this, which I could go into here, but basically this has got really deep roots. And so we're born into it, so we're wounded by it. So just the fact that we're able, over a few years, growing up and then awakening, to free ourselves from a lot of that, right? We'd be able to free ourselves from that to the point where we actually go vegan, we stop eating and paying for animal foods and so forth. But then to be able to continue and grow even more to the point where we see the bigger picture in our entire society, and how a few people and institutions are able to control billions of people through controlling media and governmental agencies and the money. And when you really understand that, then I think we can actually create a movement. But it has to come from each one of us individually, living this and understanding this and sharing these ideas, not by trying to change other people, but by understanding this. And the big problem I see in the health freedom movement is that the people in the health freedom movement, for the most part, are eating animal foods. They're still on that, haven't made that connection. And then they look at people who are vegans, who are wearing masks and getting vaccinated and telling everybody that they should wear masks and get vaccinated. And they say, the last thing I'm going to do is go vegan and be like those people. And so that's a complete misunderstanding, I think, of everything. The health freedom people really, I think, can see that how ironic it is that I want freedom for myself. I want to have my life to be able to do what I want and go what I want. And then I go to the store, I take out my wallet and I pay someone to enslave cows and pigs and chickens much worse than they plan to do to me. I mean, that's completely, not only ironic, but it's hypocritical. And then we have, on the other hand, we have people who are vegans who are all about freedom and sovereignty. And they're telling, don't say this, and censoring and locking down, and it's just, these should be natural allies. We should absolutely be natural allies. We should be supporting each other, and veganism really should be on the very front lines of the health freedom movement, basically. And health freedom people should be on the front lines of the vegan movement, of the animal liberation movement. You know, why not? Why do we want to enslave these other beings when we want to be free? So what I see coming out of this is something really wonderful, possibly, that this whole movement can coalesce into a much larger movement. We can bring people together. I've seen it, really. I mean, like it used to be so divided between like the Trump people or the Republican people, the Democrat people. And now, left and right don't mean anything anymore, really. And people realize that. You don't know. You know, I mean, the Democrat, sort of the left, has become much more tyrannical and fascist in many ways. The right already was. So we need to find a way to connect with, I think, a decentralized, land-based, individual, honoring individuals, vegan way of living, and just do it ourselves. Just basically make it happen on an individual level and create these communities. So I think the underlying idea is all of us are called to understand the situation, what's really happening as best we can. And that's why I wrote the World Peace Diet way back quite a few years ago. But I have to say, we did the 10th anniversary edition a few years ago, and I didn't have to change one word because it's even more what I said. And the history of this, I'll just say it briefly because I think it's important to understand it. If you go back 10,000 years, this is when the change happened. And we have to understand this, I think. 10,000 years ago, for some reason, people started to own animals as property for food. It was wild sheep, and then wild goats, and about 2,000 years later it was wild cows. And it was in what is today Iraq, in that area. And so in that Eastern Mediterranean region, when they started to own animals as property for food, it was like crossing a line, because now the animals are imprisoned. They're not out, you don't go out into their space and hunt them. You're actually confining them. You're stealing their freedom, stealing their sovereignty, and not only imprisoning them, which is the worst thing you can do to a free living animal, and killing them. You have to sexually abuse them. You cannot do herding. You can't have dairy or meat or eggs without sexually abusing the females. You have to impregnate them. And the more you can impregnate them, the better, right? I mean, because the more you impregnate them, the more they have offspring. The more offspring you have, the more money you have. Because when this whole thing started, that was the whole point. And that's what happened. It was a revolution. It was the last revolution in our society. People think we had a revolution with the Industrial Revolution, the Scientific Revolution. Those were not revolutions. We can kill and eat more animals faster than ever, right? It didn't change anything. But the herding revolution, that was the revolution. And that completely transformed our society and the way we relate to each other, the way we relate to animals and everything. And it gave rise, first of all, to a society that does not respect animals. Animals are either pests or they're food, they're oppressed. And number two, it gave rise to a wealthy elite class for the first time. And that wealthy elite class is what we're living with now. We can see this tiny elite class, but that came about because of animal agriculture. The herding revolution changed things so that we had, and you can read about it in the oldest books that go back about 4,000 years, the Epic of Gilgamesh. I used to teach college courses in these books, the Iliad, the Odyssey, these ancient, Old Testament books. You can see there's these kings, and these kings are in power, and they're dominating the entire society, and the only reason they have so much power and wealth is because they own the most livestock. Livestock were wealth. The more cows and sheep you had, the more powerful you were. And then these wealthy kings, to increase their wealth, they invented another institution that we still have with us, which is war. There had never been war on planet Earth until we had animal agriculture, and the oldest word for war is gavya, the old Sanskrit word. It means the desire for more cows. So we had this whole arising of a wealthy elite class going to war to get more capital. We have capita is the old word that means head, as in head of sheep and goats and cows. And so these proto-capitalists, these kings, would go to war, and then they invented slavery. There had never been actual human slavery on a mass scale until animal agriculture. And this is the point, the most important point, which is that whatever we've done to animals historically, we have eventually also done to humans. Always. So owning them as property, breeding them, and so forth. Pretty soon we're owning human beings as property and breeding them. And we have the rising of a slave state. And then the other two things were the domination of women, because animal agriculture is based on reducing the female to a breeder. You just see her as an object to be used to make babies. And you want to make more babies and so forth. And so there's this violence against the sacred feminine dimension. So basically, it was this whole package basically that animal agriculture brought, which was the domination of animals, the arising of a wealthy elite class, the arising of capitalist way of living, of a wealthy elite owning the means of production of wealth, and then war as a result of even increasing more wealth. It's the same thing today. When the rich want to get richer, what do? They go to war, right? That's the way to get more power and more wealth. and then the domination of women, because the whole thing is based on dominating female animals. It's not so much dominating, you dominate male animals, but it's mainly the female animals. And then men are also harmed because men have to basically be raised in a society where they're forced to shut down their natural sensitivity and kindness and tenderness and gentleness and be hard and tough to dominate animals and rival herders and so forth. So this is the whole system that emerged in the Eastern Mediterranean way back thousands of years ago, and that culture started conquering and destroying other more peaceful cultures and moved into the Northern Mediterranean and went from there into the Central Asia and then into Europe. And from Europe, it spread to North and South America. Right here in North America, the Indians talked about how the Europeans brought their slave animals with them. And they brought this whole mentality of the domination of nature, the fear of animals, and a science that's based on the domination of nature, and a system that's still spreading today very quickly throughout the entire planet, and is spread by these large corporations like ConAgra and Cargill and Monsanto, Kentucky Fried Chicken, Burger King, the military, industrial, meat, medical, pharmaceutical, media, banking complex we have. And so that's the thing that's arisen out of animal agriculture. Animal agriculture is the root of that. So the number one most effective antidote to the world tyranny of the many by the few is for us to go vegan, and going vegan just simply means to just live my life as best I can to minimize the slavery and violence towards other living beings, not only animals but also human beings. So that's it in a nutshell, and I can say a lot more, but I think those are the main ideas, to just understand that this whole system of animal agriculture, we've been born into it, and then it sort of makes us into its image. That's the problem. And there's a lot, this is 13 and a half hours, and then my new book is probably would be another 13 and a half hours. So that's 26 hours. I have so much I'd like to share, but the time is a difficult thing. But I think the real point is to understand that we understand that animal agriculture is very hard on the environment, right? We understand it's very wasteful, that we're overfishing the oceans, that we're cutting down rainforests, that we're growing massive amounts of grain to feed to imprison cows and pigs, and it's incredibly wasteful. It's at least 5 or 10 times more wasteful. If we would just eat the grain directly, we wouldn't have world hunger, right? We can feed everyone. Right now we're growing enough food to feed 15 to 20 billion people, right? We're worried about having 8 billion. We're growing enough food to feed at least 12 to 15 billion people. But we have a billion people starving because most of the food is being fed to animals, and the animals convert it into manure, which ends up in the water and pollutes the water. I mean, the whole system is insanely violent, but it works very well. It works perfectly to concentrate wealth in the hands of a few, and the chemical companies and the pharmaceutical industry and the petroleum industry and the big banks lurking in the background. It works great, and it keeps the wealth high, it keeps people very sick. You make money off of sick people. That's the thing, that Madeline and I talk about. The medical industry hasn't made any money on us in like 50 years. So the worst nightmare that they have is people that are eating like we do and actually taking responsibility for their health and not getting sick. So I think we could talk a long time here about just about that very subject right there, of how to take responsibility for our health, so that we're not going to the drugstore and not going to the doctor and not getting health insurance. I mean, we haven't had any of that for 50 years. And I think there's a lot of keys, there's a lot of tricks, there's a lot of things to learn to be healthy on many levels, spiritually, psychologically, movement, exercise, nutrition, creativity, all these things. But besides that, to understand, the other key really thing I want to emphasize is that animal agriculture not only is destroying the outer environment of the earth and of our society, because it's causing starvation. We have workers, we have whole armies of workers that do nothing but stab animals all day. They do nothing but impregnate cows on rape racks and steal their babies. And these workers have the highest rates of injury, and among the highest rates of suicide and drug addiction, alcoholism. So it's this violence that just permeates, it just ripples out into society, and causes a lot of trauma to people, to animals, to individuals. Indigenous people, of course, are getting slaughtered. I mean, the whole thing is just massive violence. It just keeps percolating out into society. But that's actually not nearly as serious as what it does to the inner landscape of our consciousness to be in a society and to be eating that food. That's even, in a way, it's worse. You can't see that. You can't quantify that. But to eat animal-based foods, we have to be raised in a society where we learn certain attitudes, and these attitudes, I talk about these attitudes, but I'll just maybe list 2 or 3 of them. One of them is the attitude of disconnectedness. We have to learn to just disconnect from what we're actually doing when we eat animal foods. And the ability to make connections is actually the definition of intelligence. My PhD at Berkeley was in education, and so intelligence is the capacity to make relevant connections, but the main ritual in our society is sitting down at the table and eating, and it's a ritual that requires us with every meal to don't make the connection. We're eating bacon, we're eating a fish stick. We don't think about the being. So every meal is teaching us at a very deep, primordial, ritualized level, stay shallow, don't look deeply, don't feel deeply, don't care deeply, just do what you're told. And so that makes it very easy for us to be manipulated and controlled by whoever wants to do that, because our educational system and the food system reduce our capacity to make connection. They reduce our capacity to care, really. I mean, empathy, we have to learn not to care about these animals. We have to learn that might makes right? We're powerful. The cows and pigs and chickens are not powerful. The strong dominate and exploit the weak. That's the basic subtext of every meal, is of privilege and elitism. The strong control and dominate the weak. And then the other one is the domination and exploitation of the sacred feminine dimension of life. And I think that's maybe one of the worst things, because I refer to that in the World Peace Diet as Sophia. Sophia is the Greek goddess of wisdom and represents the wisdom within us that yearns to love and nurture and protect life. But when we're eating animal-based foods, we're basically shutting that down. That's being suppressed in us. So as little kids, when we're sitting at the table, like I was as a little kid, eating pork chops and eating liver and all this stuff, I was learning, when I learned what it was animals. I was learning to not care about those beings. The sacred feminine dimension gets suppressed in us, and when that happens, it's easy to dominate and exploit human beings when that happens, because it's the sacred feminine in us, whether we're men or women, that rises up and says, I'm going to protect the kids, I'm going to protect the earth, I'm going to protect the community. But when you have meals of animal-based foods, where we just are learning basically to suppress the sacred feminine, then corporations have a much easier time rolling out products that exploit children with violence, with pornography, all these different things, and the people don't rise up because it's been suppressed. So what we're talking about essentially, I think, with the movement of animal liberation is the resurrection of the sacred feminine, the resurrection of Sophia, and the resurrection of truth, freedom, and love, essentially. Those are the 3 things that really come together in this whole thing. Understanding the truth of the interconnectedness of all life, that evokes in us a sense of love and compassion for all expressions of life. And out of that comes freedom and liberation for all of us. Because as soon as we enslave anybody, we all get enslaved. As soon as and truth is the most important thing, because when you wound another living being by stealing from them or by hitting them, they know they've been hurt, right? They know they've been wounded. They know they've been attacked. But when you deceive someone, you've hurt them, but they don't even know it. That is the most powerful, most insidious violence there ever could be, is deception. Because people are deceived and they have no idea. And then they can be manipulated and destroyed. So deception is by far the greatest evil there is, much worse than even physical violence. It's the violence that takes away, it can take everything away. And the person doesn't even know. So we have to be so vigilant about truth. What actually is true? And that's something that really requires a spiritual breakthrough. Spiritual cultivation requires meditation. It requires developing the capacity to quiet our mind. because our mind is typically nothing but thoughts that are organized around this delusion of a separate self that's been programmed by society. So, I sat for thousands of hours in a Zen monastery in Korea in meditation, and one of the things I got out of it was realizing I had been completely colonized. My mind had been colonized from the time I was a little kid by a cultural program, and to get a little glimpse, it's like the clouds had been there my entire life since I was maybe 3 years old, and to quiet the mind enough so that you can see for the first time a glimpse of the blue sky, the blue sky of our true nature. And it's always there behind the clouds. And the more we do the inner work to quiet our mind and connect with the infinite eternal sky of the radiant being that we are, the more that begins to come through our life. And we know that no matter what, the clouds of this world, the clouds of programming and illusion of this world can never harm the sky, which is what we are. We are the sky, the eternal sky. And from that understanding, we're unstoppable because we're not afraid. We're not afraid of anything. And that's the foundation, really, I think, that our movement, the vegan movement and the health freedom movement, both need to come together on that understanding. It's a spiritual understanding, because anything else, the materialism of our society, of animal agriculture, takes that away from us. But this is the, I think, the great gift that this has for us as we begin to embrace the challenge that we're facing. We're really facing a huge challenge now. So I want to thank all of you for your kind attention, and that's a few little snippets of what I wanted to say, but I'm happy to stop here and maybe take some questions. If anyone has questions or comments, I think we have time for that. So thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, this is really great stuff.
My first question.
Yes.
You alluded to it and gave me a little bit of an answer, but so as someone who doesn't eat animals, I find these conversations meaty. People who want to have a conversation about that and don't see the reasoning behind it. I think there's a lot of falsehoods, et cetera, et cetera. I've realized lately that I'm a really good at debating. I mean, I've always been that, but when it comes to so a lot of times when I find myself in these conversations is wanting to win. And so I want to show them their fallacies and show them how they're wrong. And my goal is not to necessarily change them, because I know they're not going to change. I just want to show them how full of, what they are, right?
Right.
But having been in this world for as long as you've been, I really want to shift that, and I want to stick to the most compelling statements, the most compelling things that you found that really touch the humanity that people can't really argue with and that kind of stand by themselves. And then the other side, what are the things you tend to stay away from that you find are more triggering or less productive?
Right. Yeah, I think the most triggering and least productive are things that either directly or indirectly make people wrong. Where you feel because vegans are kind of sort of famous for this, being superior, right? We're the basic subtext of any conversation is, I'm a vegan, I'm right, you're not a vegan, you're wrong. I mean, no doubt about it, and I'm here to tell you how you're wrong. And you should be like me, and if you're like me, then the whole world will be saved. And if you're not like me, then, and it's true. That's the terrible part about it, in a way, is that it is true. I mean, if people actually would go vegan, this world would be transformed in the most benevolent, positive way almost imaginable. But if I put myself in their position and some guy comes up to me with this subtext that, he's right and I'm wrong and he's going to try to convince me, I mean, the natural, healthy thing to do is to defend myself and my beliefs and who I am. And so the more that comes on, the more the defense. And so it just creates a lot of burnout among vegans, for one thing. They get I'm not gonna, and then a sort of a sense of what's the word, misanthropy, hating humans. I just wish all the humans would just all die off and we just let the animals live here, which is also not productive. So
Pretty
I think
soon they will be.
Well, yeah, I know.
If it goes on like this.
Right, that's the truth. But the thing is, the beautiful thing is that there are effective ways, I think, to reach people that don't make them resist. And so the main point is to try to avoid using any statement that has the word you in it. Like if you understood, if you just use I statements, because people can't really argue with what I'm saying about myself. And so, one of the best things you can do is tell your own story. Really, just tell your story briefly and in a way that maybe they can relate to. And I think the common element in everybody's story, whether they're vegan or not, is this truth. This is an undeniable truth that everyone, whether they're vegan or not, no one will disagree about this. And that is, and you can say it, you can say, I discovered, I realized that the only reason I was eating meat, dairy, and eggs, animal foods all those years was because I was following orders. And I realized the orders really weren't that good. They weren't that smart. They weren't in my best interests. I'm not doing it anymore. It's great. I love it. It's fantastic. And that's it. I don't have to say much more than that. That one basic thing, it's got maybe 2 or 3 components. Just discovering that the only reason I'm eating animal foods is because I'm following orders. That's true for everyone. Nobody chose out of their own free will to eat meat, or especially not to eat dairy. I mean, it's always inflicted upon them. They're compelled into it, and that's the only reason they're doing it. They're following these orders from the most trusted people, my mother, my father. You come along, it's not even that, it's my tribe. You're from another tribe. See, that's the thing, you're not eating the tribe's food. You're an outsider to them, really. So what the heck right do you have to question anything? You're not in the tribe. But when you say that, I discovered the only reason I was eating animal foods was because I was just following orders. Then you're creating the common ground, and that you were in the same tribe, and then you realize it wasn't a good idea. And you can, if you know the person's proclivities, you can say, I realized it wasn't good for my health, if they're really into health, or I realized it was really devastating, the ecosystems, or it was really cruel to the animals. You can go into that if you think that might help. But basically, it wasn't a good idea, and you can, fine-tune it. And so I'm not doing it anymore, and it's great. And a lot of times, less is more. Sometimes I've discovered the longer I talk, the worse it gets. So sometimes it's better just to plant the seed. And the neat thing is that it's really good to do it without trying to change, even to be successful in changing them. Kind of have a sense that, I love you as another human being, and I'm just telling you my story, and that's it. And letting go of trying to change them at all. Because if they sense, because we're very telepathic, and if people feel that you're trying to manipulate them into going vegan, they're going to resist. But if you just say, look, this is how it is for me, and I'm really glad, I figured that out, and then let it go. There's the Bhagavad Gita says, just let go. Don't be attached to the fruit of your actions. Don't try to keep track of whether the person followed up on that, and so they say, the best way to do it is to just say it in a way that they forget that it was you that said it. They just, some guy, somebody said this. I don't know who it was. But, I went vegan. Some guy said that, and it made me go vegan.
It's an interesting answer, because I felt like you're talking about the disconnect between the health and freedom community aspect and just the freedom community, like that aspect is still missing. But one thing that I've found seems to connect with people is kind of this alluding to what you talk about and using the word informed consent, because that's such a big piece that people talk about with health freedom, and saying, like, is your choice, what you consider to be your free will choice to eat these things, is it true informed consent? Were you actually told the truth about it? Did you really have a chance, or were you psychologically at the age to do this? And so, is your choice to continue to do it actually your free will?
But instead of saying it, is it your say it like this? And then I realized I was eating meat, but it wasn't with my own informed consent. I had never ever been informed about it, and that made me really think about it. Don't ever say you. Just I realized, and then I went vegan. I'm so glad I did, and just take the pressure off of them, because as soon as they feel you're kind of pushing, then I think that's the thing. It really, there's this old, and then all. But the other thing is, which I feel is so important. You guys carry this very well already. Is is embodying what it is, embodying what freedom is, embodying what love and truth are in your daily life. You know, that's the thing. Because I think a lot of people see vegans, for example, as pretending to be loving, but they're very critical and nasty all the time, you know? And they think, I don't want to be like that. So Emerson said that once. He said, who you are is speaking so much louder than that I can't hear what you're trying to say. You know, it's like, you know, who you are speaks more loudly than what we're saying in words. So I really think, quite honestly, that 90% of any communication has nothing to do with the words, how skillful, what the words are. And it's just how we say it, who we are as we're speaking. That's really what it is. It's the being. That's what gets people, and not trying to change them, but being on their side. You know, having a real sense of love for them and respect for them, and not in a sense trying to make them wrong or be victorious, because that ultimately we can't really win an argument. As soon as we get into a thing where we're trying to win an argument, I think we've already lost in a way, because the problem is we're only 3% of the population, you know, at the most 2 or 3%. They got 98% on their side, so they can win. They've already won. I mean, they can just say, well, I like bacon, you know, end of story. We have to realize that the whole culture is backing them up. So for us to be effective, we have to embody this. And there's that poem by Walt Whitman, the Song of the Open Road, where he says, I and mine do not convince by arguments, we convince by our presence. Now that idea of just embodying what this is all about. Veganism is caring. You know, caring, that's what it is, it's caring. So, you know, authentically caring, authentically loving and caring. So if we can embody that in the way we live our lives in relationship with other human beings, then I think we're planting seeds really the most effective way. And that's the future of the vegan movement. We haven't got that far. Most vegans are still at the level of handing out things or talking, trying to argue, trying to win. We've got to really embody this. And that's the great, wonderful challenge we have. You know, it's a self-transformation. Transform ourselves so that we're embodying love and kindness and compassion with every gesture and word that we are. So it really gets deep. And people will feel that. And that's, I think, the great beauty of what this movement is about. It's really about not just transforming the world, but transforming ourselves first, and that does transform the world. Yeah. So that's a great question. Thank you so much, Paul. Yeah. Any other questions or comments or anything? Yes?
I don't know from where you are with like bug spray and that kind of stuff, you know, like I would imagine you've gone pretty deep down that wormhole. So, but just the idea, like, you know, we have to kill the bugs, almost like is something that ties into warfare in a weird way. Like we have to exterminate.
Right.
You know, living with, especially the angle where so much of the food waste is salty, sugary, oily, which is all stuff that these so-called pests like thrive on. So not just on the sense of the monocrop aspect, but actual like the end result of those foods and stuff. So anyways, I don't know where you want to take that, but it was just some of the things I thought about.
Do you kill bugs? Besides rabbit?
Well, we probably do a little bit here and there. We try not to kill them if at all possible. Like we have a garden. You know, the garden is an interesting thing, and we have certain bugs that kind of attack some of our vegetables and fruits, and we have a vacuum cleaner with a hand vacuum cleaner. We go around, you know, vacuum them up and I take them down when I go swimming in the beach every morning. I take them down with me and let them go. They can take a swim with me if they want. No, I let them go in the grass there. Give them a new life, but we really do our best to not kill insects, because I think, you know, like they say in India, they talk about this. If you start treating insects as pests and trying to exterminate them, the next thing you're going to be doing is treating human beings like pests and trying to exterminate them. Right? It's a small step, really. Whatever. They're just a bunch of cockroaches. Let's get rid of them. You know, exterminate these people. And that always happens. I mean, in wars and things, people reduce the enemy or whatever to the status of animals or insects. So I think to try to just cultivate a sense of compassion, even for insects, is a good thing. As best we can. And most insects I guess it depends on where you live. I mean, we live in Northern California that we're not really that bugged by, we don't
Bugs.
live, we're not bugged by bugs. No, we're not that many. I mean, a lot of people are afraid of yellow jackets and bees and hornets, and I'm not, because
No.
they crawl, well, I'm not worried about them. And spiders we like. I mean, most of the mosquitoes, we don't have that many, so it's not that big a deal, or we try to put them outside.
No,
Well,
no, we try to.
I mean, we have been known to kill mosquitoes. We try not to, but yeah. But like when I lived as a Zen monk in Korea, I mean, that was absolutely verboten. You know, you would never kill an insect. So it was really interesting to live in a community where there was no meat, no dairy, no eggs, no wool, no silk, no leather, no killing insects for 800 years. You know, they lived like that. So that's what was so empowering to me. When I came back to the society eventually, I really realized that veganism is not this new thing. It's an ancient wisdom tradition that goes back hundreds of years in Asia. And they knew that you cannot ever really significantly increase your spirituality or create a harmonious society if you're going to dominate and exploit and harm animals. And so they really lived that way. And it was interesting because there was a couple of monks that were really highly enlightened. And I remember sitting on this veranda, and the mosquitoes were like bugging me and biting, and of course you can't kill them. But these enlightened monks, they never touched them. It was so interesting. They would just relax. Yeah. They're not saying. I thought, all right, that's a good test. My thoughts are kind of pulling them toward me or something. I'm not sure what it was, but it was an interesting experience. I had this monk next to me. He was from Denmark. And we would be sitting there in meditation, you know, for hours at a time, and the mosquito would land on him, and he always went like this. And so the mosquito would leave, and then he'd come over to me, and I said, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to, and it was like it was like giving a blood offering. I said, all right, take your blood, because then once they get the blood, they're done. They leave everybody alone, you know, and it itches for a few minutes, but then it's gone, and it's like not that big a deal. So, you know, I guess it's kind of like learning, you know, to live with things and trying to respect all beings have a place here. You know, they're all valuable, and we can communicate with them, I think, intuitively also, more than we realize. That's part of it. I think if we can develop our intuition, we can communicate with insects and animals and even, you know, plants and so forth. And the more we do that, I think the more they'll communicate back with us. And right now we live in a society where that doesn't happen at all. You know, we think there's the trees are just dead, you know, I mean, they're alive. But I did a practice at one point in my life when I was younger of walking for 72 hours without stopping. It's really it was a hard practice. My old Zen teacher said, just try that. Walk for 72 hours without stopping. So I was walking in this backyard of this little house in Oakland where I was living, and walking around a plum tree. And after a day, 12 hours, I still had 60 hours. You know, I realized this was really hard. And but by the second night, it was like the rational mind at one point just gives up. And I remember I started to see the plants in a whole different way, where they were much more alive, especially, you know, the colors were much more bright and vivid. But that plum tree, by the second night and especially the third night, became a being. You know, I was walking around this tree like, oh my God, you know, it was dancing and moving and had a consciousness that was very vivid and present. And during the day, I had just thought this tree, nothing, not just a tree, you know. But then I could see it wasn't just a tree. But I never would have had that experience if I hadn't like walked for 72 hours without stopping. So I think if we need to put ourselves into positions to have revelations, in a sense, you know, to do things. Like, you know, I put myself in a position to meditate in silence for 4 months or whatever. And it helps. You can go through layers and have experiences that normally wouldn't have. And some of those experiences were really helpful. Like, I remember I got this terrible back pain. I was on a retreat doing prostrations. Right? I was in Tibetan Buddhist tradition. I was doing like hundreds of prostrations every day. And I got this terrible back pain. And then there's a pain in the mind. And I realized that this back pain I was having was actually nothing to do with my back. It was this little boy, when I was a young little boy, like 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, I was really a happy little kid reaching out to life and everything. And then at a certain point I got kind of wounded and afraid, and and scared. And so I started pulling back and it hurt. And so that's what my pain was. Every time I reached out, it hurt. And so then I realized that this back pain I had was actually the little boy in his still yelling and wanting to be loved. And so then I knew. And then I handled it right then, because I had been by myself in this cabin for months, and so I was in this altered state. So I just knew that what I am is the infinite consciousness, and that little boy he doesn't need to run my life anymore. And so then the back pain just disappeared instantly once I got that idea, once I understood that. That was the message. But the problem is we live in a society where if you get a back pain, you better get some medication for it. You better go to the doctor and get an operation done. And so the little boy never gets heard, and so then you get cancer, then you get the next thing. And it just goes more and more because we don't put ourselves in the position to actually deal with it. So that's why, like, not going to the doctor for 50 years is because I wasn't going to go the easy way and take a material cure for a spiritual malady. It's never going to work. We need to find the real cause and work with it. And then, so every so-called illness is an opportunity to learn what the deeper reason is. And I think once we begin to live that way more, we begin to liberate ourselves from needing material medicine of those kinds of things that can be very often have a lot of harmful effects. So I think ultimately the mind is, we were talking about this, the mind is the greatest benefactor that we have. It can be the greatest tyrant we have also. But the more we can work with our mind, and we're not taught that. We're not taught how to work with our mind in a positive way. We're taught how to be scattered and afraid, but not taught how to really be present and attentive to this moment and to look beyond the surface to the deeper realities. That's, I think, again, what all these movements really are calling us to do is to look beyond the shallow surface to the deeper realities and create our world out of our consciousness rather than just, proactively, rather than just reacting to what's happening. Anyway. So
how long were you in the monastery?
Well, I was there in South Korea for about 6 months, but I was about 8 years, I guess, in monasteries and centers in the United States before going over there. Mostly in California, Alabama, Georgia, and then Northern California. Mostly Zen, but some Tibetan Buddhists also. And that was really, it's just, I left home, when I was right out of, I have the story in here, but briefly what it is, I was in college, and I just started feeling this sense, like Joseph Campbell said, of a midlife crisis. What am I doing with my life? And I was supposed to take over my father's newspaper business. He owned a whole chain of newspapers. And from that, of course, I learned not to trust the media, because I learned in my bones that all the news has to be approved by the advertisers. And if the advertisers don't like it, you don't run it. And so that has made me immune to the news, because I know it's just nothing but lies. It's just whatever the biggest advertisers want you to think. That's what's in the radio, television, everywhere. It's the corporate view of the world. But anyway, so when I was at Colby College in Maine back in the early 1970s, I just started questioning everything and meditating and doing yoga and all this stuff. And so right after college, myself and my younger brother, Ed, left home. We thought we'd walk to California on a spiritual pilgrimage, and we walked as far as Buffalo, New York. And then it was getting cold. It was October, so we headed south. We walked all the way to Alabama with no money and just walking. And it was a great adventure, really. And on the way, we were just meditating. We were doing that Ramana Maharshi said, ask, who am I? So we were just thousands of times a day, we would just say, who am I, who am I, who am I? And so in a way, that was it. That's when I left the world. I left, and I have never come back, really, in a certain sense. I realized that this world has nothing really to offer. And we're on our own to we need to wake up. We need to find out who we are. And so eventually on that walk, at one point we came to a place called the Farm. And the Farm in 1975 was the largest hippie commune in the world. And they were all vegetarians. And so that was when I actually, in 1975, stopped eating meat. And I found out Madeline in 1975 in Switzerland also stopped eating any animal foods back then. Same month and year, actually. And so then I ended up going to a Zen center in Huntsville, Alabama, and living there. And a few years later, I gave up the dairy and eggs, became a vegan in 1980. So it was really, for me, it was really part of a spiritual practice. And I was living my life, I was free. I mean, I had left home, I didn't have any obligations, I had no money, I had no parents, I had no anything, just out there. And so I was questioning everything. It was great. I mean, it was kind of like creating a rite of initiation, or a rite of passage of some kind for myself, my brother and I. And then ended up in these meditation centers and just living in those and meditating a lot, and then deciding eventually to leave all that. And I got a master's degree and a PhD in art college, and then I met Madeline in Switzerland, and we traveled for 17 years in that RV, and going to mainly to progressive, like unity churches, Unitarian churches, and putting on workshops on developing intuition. My PhD dissertation at Berkeley was on educating intuition in adults using mainly Buddhist teachings. And it was great that I was able to do all that and teach. I taught college for about 5 or 6 years too, in the San Francisco Bay Area. But the underlying, really the main message, I think, in all of this is really veganism and spirituality. Those two things: compassion for all life, liberation, and a spiritual path, which is basically just recognize. I think it's more than recognize. It's like really questioning all the assumptions we have about the nature of reality, and finding out like what actually is going on here. And I think you can go deeper and deeper into it, and that's what we're called to do, I think, and help each other to do that. Really help each other to do that. And the best way to help others is to really make the effort ourselves, in our own way. And when we do that, I think we're living our life in a positive way, and we never know when that life is going to end. That's the thing. It's very short. Our life's very temporary, very quick. We're only here for a few short decades. So to use our time, don't fritter it away, as they say. Don't use it well, because it goes by so fast. And we have a lot to be thankful for, really. I think we have so much to be thankful for. So to coming from a place of just of positivity, that we can create a better world. It's beckoning us. The positive future is beckoning. And the adversaries that we see that seem to be against us, see them as, in a sense, as allies in a certain way. They're challenging us to not to be static and comfortable, but to really do it. We're getting challenged. That's actually a good thing. This is a challenging time.
Yeah. I love your presentation. I love your art.
That's Madeline's art.
I love the fact that you stand up for what you believe, you share your story, and look at the experiences you've gone through. And the voice does the Buddha's work. That's so apparent with you and Paul. And you use impeccable words, and those are words that don't blame. Those are words that don't harm. Those are words that have compassion and love and caring. And impeccable, I love that word, impeccable. And if we can learn to do that, as you very well do, and that resonates in other people's lives, and you don't put them on the defensive, it always comes back to you, how I feel, how I'm doing this because this is my awakening, or this is what, feels good for me, right? But what other people are going to feel good with, that's on them, right? And I didn't even know anything about you until today. I got on the computer.
Of course.
I typed in your name, and the book came up, and then picture of you came up, and now hearing you in person, you know what? I'm in awe. You're my hero. You're my hero. You know what? Because one day I'm going to be you. And you're going to be me. And that could be today.
Beautiful.
That could be today.
Going beyond the beyond. Thank you. Thanks so
Awesome.
much. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And you.
Tiny Tim said. Great. All right. Well, yes, you have a.
Yes, earlier it sounded like you were alluding to the fact that a lot of the, a lot of the medicine that's produced by the pharmaceutical industry is disseminated through animals. Would you say more of it is used in the animal agricultural industry than what's actually used as medicine on human beings? Or what do you think that ratio
Well, that's
is?
good. You know about that. Yeah.
It sounded like you kind of just were mentioning that a little bit
Yeah,
in the
well-
presentation in the beginning.
Okay, so that's the thing. One of the things I've realized, which I think a lot of vegans aren't even aware of, is that the biggest enemy of veganism is not the meat industry or the dairy industry. It's the pharmaceutical industry. Pharmaceutical industry is rich, and they have all kinds of lawyers and lobbyists, and they're cunning, and they are infiltrating the vegan movement. They hate the vegan movement. The pharmaceutical industry is the most brutal industry against animals. I mean, they're vivisecting animals by the millions, horribly torturing them in experiments. But then they make their profits mainly from animal agriculture. There's over 10,000 drugs, hormones, antibiotics, 90% of antibiotics, they're used on factory farmed animals, or, animals. I mean, factory farm, backyard farm, however they're farmed. So that's where they make huge profits. I'm not sure if it's the most, but it's a major profit for them. Is all these poor cows and pigs and chickens? There's medications in their feed. They're injected over and over again. They don't have a choice about it. It's mandatory injections. It's spurred on their bodies. Everything. So but then the other big profit is for sickness, right? So people then eat all that toxic food, and they get diabetes and liver disease and kidney disease and heart disease and cancer and all this stuff. So they need their medications. So the pharmaceutical industry is making all their profits from the animal agriculture industry and that. And then the third thing, really, which you should, I think, bring into play, is the fact that the biggest profit sector that the pharmaceutical industry has is medications for various psychological conditions. Like, that's where their biggest profits are. Medications for depression, especially anxiety, insomnia, and the animals that people are eating are suffering from depression and anxiety and insomnia and so forth. So they're inflicting that on these animals. The people are eating that flesh of these poor, depressed and anxious animals and big farmers in the background getting rich on all of it. And with all that money, they can buy everything. They've bought virtually all the elections. They bought the politicians. They bought the judges. They bought the executive. They bought the FDA, the USDA, the CDC, the NIH. They bought all the governmental agencies. They bought the media. They bought the state level governments. They bought the county level governments. They bought everything. You get the billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars that they have. They use it to buy power and buy the narrative. And because I remember when I was younger, on 60 Minutes, every once in a while, like back in the 80s and 90s, they would do exposés of the pharmaceutical industry. And they never do that anymore. They're own.
Vaccines they used to.
Yeah, exactly.
Talk about the dangers of vaccines.
Right, they would talk about the dangers of vaccines. People didn't want to get vaccinated because they knew it was dangerous. In fact, I write about it in my new book, how whenever it was, right, in 1986, right before that, there was only 3 companies still making vaccines, and they were basically going out of business. They were getting sued so much for their vaccine. That the vaccines were over. It was like done. Everybody knew they were unsafe, and they couldn't make them anymore. So that's when they passed that law. They took away their liability, and boy, then their profits just went through the roof because now they have no liability.
Immunity they ever really had anything to do with.
Pardon me?
The only immunity they ever had anything to
Yeah.
do with was getting immunity.
Their own immunity. And so then they've used that money to take even more power and buy, and the CDC and the NIH have come out with actual policies that no one can say anything against vaccination. No scientist, no doctor, because it's like become this sacred thing. Because they know how deadly they are.
No vegan activists can talk about it.
There's so many animal products. That's something that gets me when I hear friends talk about that they just can't handle seeing somebody hurt a tree, right? They were like, these kids, I had to take my kids out of the school because they
Oh, right.
were, the people running the school were letting them just tear up this tree and cut into it and everything. And I
And they're
didn't
still
want to
eating
get
meat.
into it with
Yeah.
that person in the moment, but I really wanted to be like, do you know that horseshoe crabs are used to make the vaccine you just took?
Right.
Like, do you understand that? And I didn't get into it with her in the moment, but it just blows my mind that,
Right.
you know,
It's-
they don't
it's
even
co-
look into it. I'm sure she didn't even know that animal products.
The thing is,
were-
animal agriculture, being raised in an animal agriculture society, what it teaches us early on is compartmentalization. We learn this is a food animal, this is an animal you pet. And so when someone, this is a tree you respect, but animals that are used for medications or for food, they're just, they don't matter. We put them in a category and they don't matter. And you're calling them out on it, but in a way, it's almost like a religion. It's so deeply embedded because it's not just something they believe, it's something, the belief has been inserted into them without their consent. That belief has been put into them by the culture, by their consumption pattern, and by the massive bombardment of narrative management. And so it's a belief that they believe, but they never arrived at it freely on their own. So if you question it, all they can do is either not hear it or get angry and fight back. That's the thing. So that's why we got to just plant our seeds and say, I realize this, and try to jog their memory, plant a seed, and hope that their own compassion will water that seed that you're planting.
In the moment, I was just too triggered by it to
Right.
be able to get into it with her. But I've had other experiences with
Yeah.
other friends who are really enlightened people who just never questioned the vaccine for some reason. Right? They just were told to take it, it's safe, and take it. And because they had never had any judgment, positive or negative, around vaccines, they just thought they were safe. I was actually able to drop in with them and be like, do you know what's in those vaccines?
Yeah.
There's X, Y, Z, and all these other horrible toxins, and they just, their jaw dropped every time I told them one more ingredient. It was like, oh my God. And I was like, promise me you'll never take this again.
Good.
Luckily, I think that he was influenced by me positively, you know. But like you're saying, I think it makes sense to approach it from a different.
Yeah, giving the information in a kind, respectful way like that, that's beautiful.
That
Yeah.
reminded me of something. So this is something I struggle with. So it's my understanding, like I've read some different like esoteric texts, and it seems to be across the board that when you get to a certain point on a path of enlightenment, that this idea of compassion will become in you enough that you will make these choices naturally, that this is just part of the process, that with enlightenment comes compassion, with compassion you stop exploiting other creatures, right? That's like the path. So when I find a really spiritual teacher that seems to have like skipped over that step in their process, I have a really hard time accepting a lot of the rest of their message, because I feel like there's some, like, that if they've missed this big piece of the puzzle, how can the rest of what they have to say have like this like deep value, you know? Do you ever?
Oh yeah, I've lived with that a lot. I mean, like when I lived at the Tibetan Buddhist Center, the Lama he was a very profound Lama with a very deep meditation experience. We were all vegetarians at that point. It was back in the late 70s. But we had to cut up his beef for lunch every single day. Right? So, and that's one of the reasons I left eventually. But I think I don't want to say. It's a tricky thing. You can have some pretty deep realizations that are authentic and still not make other realizations. Still not make certain connections. Mm-hmm. And you can also have people that are vegan, for example, and they make those connections, and they're like really from a spiritual evolution, like not very far at all. And so you can't. So I think it's a matter of just understanding that life is complex and spiritual path is very complex, and people have different ways of going about it, and then our whole society is so radically skewed in favor of allowing violence towards animals is no big deal, that they can get away with this. They can get away with gross kind of hypocrisy, I guess you'd say, of embodying and speaking about love and compassion, and everybody just oohing and ahhing about that, and yet there they are. You know, Eckhart Tolle, all these people, Deepak Chopra, whoever you want to talk about, pretty much all of them they're not vegan, and we look up to them like they're really enlightened somehow. And from my point of view, the proof is in the pudding. I mean, you're definitely missing something, you know, for sure. And so to me, at this point, I think authentic spiritual teachers really need to not be doing anything to harm animals unnecessarily, and also teaching that, proactively teaching that, you know, promoting veganism. Like Thich Nhat Hanh, for example. You know, we knew him before he was vegan and teaching veganism. And I remember we made a pretty big stink about it when to his monks in Vermont. And about a year later, they all went vegan. You know, and we've seen that with some other spiritual teachers, Ching Hai also. And so I think they can change. They can go vegan, and I think that really elevates their message and elevates the quality of their teaching and elevates their respect that they have in the world. But they also take a risk. A lot of people they don't like it. And a lot of people ask me about the Dalai Lama, because I was in the Tibetan thing a lot, and he tried to go vegetarian, and then he went back, and the doctor said he was going to be sick. But I could see from seeing all the high lamas that would come through that if the Dalai Lama went vegetarian or vegan, but he did go vegetarian. He is a vegetarian. It's just that when he travels, he'll eat whatever he says it's the monk's thing to eat whatever puts in your bowl. So even if they put veal in his bowl, he'll eat it, which is like ridiculous. But at Dharamsala, where he lives, it's all vegetarian. But it's not vegan, but at least it's vegetarian. But I know he would have, because he's in a very political position, and these high lamas around him would be really furious with him if he went really like vegan or something. That would be making them all look bad. It would be very hard for him to do that. You know, people think that, well, he's a Dalai Lama, he can do whatever he wants. But it's, you know, I can see from his point of view, he would upset everybody an awful lot. So he's kind of did what he could, but you know, he could have done better, I guess. You know, it's one of those things. You know, there's the political situations involved in these things too. But like in Korea, when I was there, the really high monks that are very enlightened, it's all vegan, which is very refreshing. Taiwan also, China also. Like when we were in China, I gave lectures to 400 or 500 people.
Shufu.
Yeah, right. Yeah, Chufu and down in the southern part, they have these Buddhist monks that they're vegan, and they have vegan schools. They have vegan. I mean, we saw amazing things, and also in Taiwan, where they have whole schools. The whole school is vegan. The children are vegan. They have organic farms. You wouldn't believe what we saw, really. I mean, if you could see what we saw in Taiwan, I wish I could go back and make a documentary film about it, because they have these Buddhist schools where everything is organic vegan, and they have a chain of stores now in Taiwan, over 100 stores, and they're all organic, and it's all because of one Buddhist teacher. It's one guy, this one Buddhist. He was out in a field, and he saw some dead ducks, and he said, "Why are these ducks dead?" Well, the farmer poisoned them because they're eating his crops. And he started weeping, and he just wept and wept, and he said, "This has got to stop." And so he had his students go to some farmers and say, if you will grow organically with no chemicals and pesticides, we will buy your crops. And they said, "All right, if you're guaranteed to buy them, we'll do it that way." And so they opened one store, and they had like 3 or 4 farmers, and they did that. And they did that for a while. Then they got 2 stores, and they got 3 stores. They're now at like 130 stores all over Taiwan. They have vegan restaurants. Everything's organic. And then they opened these schools. I mean, we went to these schools, and they take prisoners out of prison, and they have them working on these farms that are all organic. And the farmers, we met the farmers. How they used to have, like, you go up into the mountains of Taiwan, and they have these organic farms that are sponsored by these Buddhists. And there's all these dogs running around that have 3 legs, because just a few years before, they had to put traps out for the monkeys, because the monkeys would come in and steal all the crops. And so the dogs would get caught in the traps and their legs would get torn off. And so they started not only saying, we will buy your produce if you grow organic. They said, every Wednesday night we'll have a Dharma class and we'll teach you the Buddhist teachings. And when the farmers learned the Buddhist teachings of compassion for all life, and look at the monkeys not as the enemies, but as fellow beings on the path too, then their spirituality grew, and now they love. They were saying before, when they were using chemicals and pesticides, they were practically suicidal. They were always in a battle with the elements, and a battle with the weather, and a battle with the pests, and all this. And now they're Buddhists. They're doing it out of compassion. They have a guarantee. These people are buying their organic produce. They're so happy, and they have prisoners coming in, and they're reforming the prisoners. They work on these organic farms, and seeing all these kids growing there. They have these big, huge organic fields, and all the children are growing the food themselves, and the older kids teach the younger kids how to weed and how to do the thing, and they're such beautiful kids. And they don't allow them to have cell phones. They don't allow them to have any computers at all. It's just go out there and work in the fields and grow the food and teach. They have these beautiful schools. I mean, it's hundreds, big, huge, probably 500 or 1,000 students in these schools, and then the parents come in and they do Dharma classes together, and it's just such a beautiful thing. It's like, instead of complaining about how it is, just create something great,
Yeah,
they're doing it.
They grow the food, they harvest the food, and they prepare the food.
The kids do all of it.
Food,
yeah, the kids do
have
everything.
some.
Closed
They have some people who come also, who are invited, and we were there and we got this food, and these kids, they were small kids, bigger kids, they just beautiful. I mean, so many courses of wonderful food. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, it's really, that's the thing, it would be so great. I wish, Christianity could kind of evolve in that direction. Because over there, if you're a vegan, it's because they say, oh, you must be a Buddhist. Oh, yeah, I tell them I'm a Buddhist. It'd be so great if that was the same way with Christianity. But it can happen, or whatever, or whatever religion. But spirituality is really connected with this. And when we raise kids in that environment, then to them it's natural, and it's a whole different thing, so, yeah. Yeah, anyway, so...
Yeah, the thing also is that they learn meditating from very baby.
Yeah, they do it with their parents.
Yeah, with their
And in the
parents
school, they do it, yeah.
And there is no input by electronics, so they search some other things they can be curious about, nature and animals, and yeah, it's like really beautiful.
Yes.
I was just gonna say, I don't know if you've heard this before, but they found that trees have a heartbeat. It's like roughly 4 beats a day. It pulses.
4 beats a day.
Yeah,
Interesting.
I think it might be
The rhythm of the moving the fluids up and down.
Yeah, I think it's a similar thing with the Kundalini energy and our cerebral spinal fluid pulsing.
Pulsing 4 times a day?
Yeah, I think it might be about the same. Yeah. And then what was some?
That's a good one, yeah.
So that's all, I thought you enjoyed that. And I was thinking about how interesting, the way that they're selling pounds of flesh, kind of like what they do with dead people during the pandemic, whatever nonsense. Using the stats, it's almost a poundage, instead of a life instead of a pound.
Right.
And let's see. Do you have any have you had any interactions with Dr. Greger, since this all started? Have you ever run into him in general?
Dr. Michael Greger?
Previously, at Veg Fest or something like that, or yeah?
Oh yeah, Michael Greger's an old friend of ours. I mean, I've known him since when he was, nobody even heard of him. He was just a young guy, beginning with everything. And but he's done great. He's really was always in it, in at least in the beginning, for the animals. And was really was a great speaker for animal rights. And then he worked for the Humane Society, and he was kind of in a prison because the Humane Society really wanted him to not talk about certain things, because the Humane Society is much more welfare oriented, and he was before that he was more animal rights oriented. But then he left that and he kind of went on his own, and now he's basically emphasizing the many health benefits of a plant-based diet. But the problem, of course, from my point of view, is that he is, as an MD, he's been programmed into the pharmaceutical model of vaccinations.
Yeah, vaccines,
Yeah.
trial was going.
So, but it's not just him. I mean, virtually every vegan doctor, and almost every doctor in general, there's a few doctors in general who have been able to speak up against it, but, you know, like Dr. McCullough is a good example. I mean, you can't get a more respectable doctor than him, and yet he's having his license taken away from him. They're trying to take it away. They've done it for other people, other highly respected doctors. So for doctors, it's a really tough thing because they don't have any other skill typically. You know, they all they know how to do is be a doctor. So if they say anything questioning the official vaccine narrative, they will probably pay for it. They could very well lose their ability to make any living. And what are they going to do? Like go to McDonald's and work or something? They don't have any other skills. So I think they're very terrified. And doctors have really, to me, have been very disappointing how they've just gone along with this whole thing and like almost willingly just killed people. Like just kill them left and right. Just don't quite, just vaccinate them. Just ignore the evidence. It's really been disgraceful, you know, to me, how they've acted. But I've also tried to see it from their point of view, that it's very difficult for them to make any money to survive, and they're used to making money, right? And then the other thing is, besides the fact that they're being controlled by the AMA, and you know, very strongly, is that they don't know anything about vaccines either. I mean, like they don't know anything about nutrition. Right? They get maybe one class or a couple, maybe not even a course on nutrition. They don't get anything about vaccines. They have like one class, they'll say, well, this is the vaccine schedule. We give them this at this age, this and this and this, and it's really good. Okay, now on to the next thing. And the next thing is, of course, what's really important, which is all the different drugs they're going to prescribe and all the different conditions they're going to treat with the different drugs. That's what they really want to, you know, emphasize. They don't want them to know anything about vaccines, so they don't know anything about vaccines. So when people go to the doctor for advice about nutrition, I always say you'd be better off going to a car mechanic for advice about nutrition. And if they go for advice about vaccines, you'd be better off going to a car mechanic for advice about vaccines too, probably, because they don't know anything. They just know what they've been told, and they're terrified to question it. And that's been the main problem for the vegan movement, because this is the last thing I'll say about that, is that I think one of the main reasons the vegan movement has done so poorly in terms of standing up to this whole thing of the vaccination devastation is that vegans really honor, respect, and almost venerate the vegan doctors, the vegan MDs. You know, there's Caldwell Esselstyn, Neil Bernard, John McDougall, Michael Greger, Joel Furman. You know, there's maybe 10 or so vegan doctors who are great. I mean, they've really worked hard. They've done an uphill battle against the whole medical establishment, the pharmaceutical establishment, to try to really establish that a plant-based diet is just as healthy or healthier than eating meat, dairy, and eggs. And that's a great service. So the vegans love these people. But every single one of them totally went along with the whole vaccine thing. Milton Mills, all of them. So because of that, I think most vegans say, well, we can't question them. I mean, they're God. They're the gods of the vegan movement. They're the ones. They're our leaders. They're going for it. We got to go for it too. I think that really was a tragedy. The only one who questioned it really was Joel Kahn.
Joel Kahn, yeah.
And then Gabriel Cousins also, but Gabriel Cousins already they already blocked him, and he went to Israel. But pretty much all the other ones, they didn't question it, and I think they kind of did the vegan movement by that somewhat of a disservice, unfortunately. But I understand it's very hard for them to question it. They're brainwashed like everybody.
Right?
He's not an MD.
Oh.
Oh, no, yeah. T. Colin Campbell has a PhD in nutrition, so he's free. Just like me, I have a PhD. I can say whatever I want. But if I was an MD, I couldn't. Can you imagine if I was an MD trying to say this? I would never. I'd be over.
I did get Gregor to admit, I interviewed him shortly, and I didn't try to harp on the whole pandemic stuff the whole time. I had a little fun with it, but when I did get in that territory, I said something about like just assuming like you're going to keep vaccinating, like shooting ourselves in the foot and then trying to vaccinate our way out of it. And like kind of that angle, and he gave me a little touche and some props for that. So, so it was cool. I mean, I just try to plant seeds, but I think it would be great to like reconnect with them and try and like talk about some of this. So I don't know if you do it on camera, but I mean that would be a game changer. Like Chappelle, he's like the Chappelle.
You're here on our stage.
These people, I know them. I mean, they're not gonna. They have too much to lose.
Okay.
He'd lose everything.
There's a new documentary getting ready to start on the 29th, I believe, of this month, called Brave. It's going to be nationally televised. 30 doctors are going to be speaking up,
Oh, good.
you know, about standing up for health freedom. And
It's called Brave. Yeah.
called Brave.
Good. That has to happen. There's a movie we just saw yet last night that just came out. This documentary called "Died Suddenly."
Yeah.
Did you see "Died Suddenly"? It's really good.
I already knew a lot of stuff.
Yeah, but it's
just mind blowing to see.
It's really good. This one person I just read today, he said it's the most important documentary of all time. In the history of the world, it's the most important documentary. I mean, I can see it because it's coroners who really know dead people. When people are dead after being vaccinated, they can't get the fluid to go through their veins because they're completely clogged with this white fibrous material that's from the vaccines. And then you can't argue with it. This is the evidence. This is fact, and they won't touch it. You know, but it's a really important documentary just to share with people. Okay, one last thing.
So, I was going to say earlier, I think it's interesting how they dress doctors in white coats and everything's so bright. It's like they're the angels, right?
The high priests.
Like they're the high priests.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've had people tell me if my child dies from a vaccine that that's the sacrifice I need to make.
A sacrifice.
I go, you know what? I'm not part of the old religion, and I'm not going to sacrifice my child on an altar to your doctor. It's not
Exactly.
going to happen. Right? And I find it interesting as well how doctors push vaccines on pregnant women, even though there have
Yeah.
never been any studies on it at all, and they push it like it's perfectly normal.
Yeah,
You know, like, oh, do it, and then these women are having miscarriages and
Yeah.
whatnot. So that part also is just crazy to me. And
It
then
is.
What also is really challenging, even when a doctor is open-minded and they say, that's great if you want to be vegan or vegetarian, the moment you are pregnant and you start talking to them, they go, well, that diet could be fine, but you're pregnant and you need X, Y, Z. And so, you know, even if they're open-minded to you being vegetarian or vegan, they want to tell you, but when you're pregnant, you have to at least take fish oil, or at least do this, at least eat eggs, you know. And so that part really has been
Well, luckily,
challenging to
you know,
see. Even my doctor said the same, even though he's one of like the
We
most
meet a lot
amazing
of
doctors.
people that said they didn't eat animals and then they got pregnant. And
Right.
The doctor told them they had to, and then
That was the end
they
of
had
it.
a baby and they had to keep feeding it to their kid. Like I've heard that story over and over and over again.
Well, the American Academy of Dietetics clearly says that all human beings in all stages of life, including lactating women, pregnant women, children, old people, can all thrive on a plant-based diet. So you have the science on your side, but they don't know that. You got to tell them, you got to educate them, or just don't go to them. More of all of us.
Inspired. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. And I want to just thank. Let's give a big hand to Madeline too for the paintings and all the support she gives. Thank you so much, and thank you, Lisa, for all your support, and thank you, guys, everyone, for coming. And I'm happy to sign. We have copies of the World Peace Site and other books. Madeline has lots of paintings and prints and cards and wrist warmers and CDs of music and so forth. If you're interested.